I'm Laura Bennett, and I never thought standing up to the HOA over a bridge to my sister's island would drag me into a multi-million-dollar corruption scheme involving politicians, developers, and even my nosy neighbors. How could I have known that fighting to visit my sister Grace, who's battling cancer, would lead to FBI raids and secret recordings that would bring down an entire criminal organization? It all started at Lake Clearwater, Michigan, where I live at 18 Shoreline Drive. The wooden bridge I built last summer was the only way to Grace's island home, a path that cut a 45-minute drive down to a 3-minute walk. Grace needed me, especially after those brutal chemo days. I was pruning plants in the garden when the HOA letter arrived, bright yellow paper, their way of saying we're not kidding. My hands shook as I read, "Unauthorized structure must be removed within 30 days. They were talking about my bridge, the one I sweated over to reach Grace. "This can't be happening," I whispered, sinking onto the porch steps. Grace was getting weaker every day, and that bridge was her lifeline. I called the HOA office right away, but no one picked up. President Margaret Pierce was notoriously lazy, so I knew I'd have to confront her face to face at tomorrow's meeting. But I had no idea how fast things would escalate. Just a few weeks later, I paddled a kayak through a storm to Grace's island, smashed a window to climb in, and found Tom Hayes, my smug new neighbor, and a guy from Horizon Estates pressuring Grace to sell her island. They threatened her, but I wouldn't let it slide. Then blue lights flashed outside. "FBI here. The house is surrounded." From a little bridge to the FBI at the door, how could I have known it would go this far? Stick around to hear the whole crazy truth behind it. Here is the translation into American English, preserving all content without adding or removing anything. After reading the yellow letter from the HOA, I felt like the ground beneath my feet had collapsed. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you just watched the first part, you know I'm talking about the wooden bridge, the only way to my sister Grace's island, on Lake Clearwater, Michigan. The letter sat there on the kitchen table, bolded. "Unauthorized structure must be removed within 30 days. I picked it up, my hands shaking so much I spilled my morning coffee. This wasn't just a bridge. It was how I brought medicine to Grace, how I got to hug her when she was too weak after chemo. Grace is fighting stage 3 breast cancer, and every day I'm not there is a day she has to endure alone. I looked out the window, seeing the bridge stretch across the shimmering waters of Lake Clearwater. Last summer, I hammered every nail, sawed every plank, sweat soaking my shirt just to make sure Grace wasn't isolated. Now this damn HOA wants to tear it down. I grabbed the phone, dialing the HOA office so fast I nearly dropped it. It rang, then silence. No one answered. I muttered, "Margaret Pierce, where the hell are you?" She's the HOA president, a woman the whole neighborhood knows only shows up when it suits her. I'd seen her cruise by in her shiny silver Mercedes, not bothering to glance at anyone. If I wanted to save the bridge, I'd have to face her directly. I sat on the porch, letters still in hand, trying to figure out what was happening. The bridge is on my private land, 18 Shoreline Drive, and Grace's Island isn't even under HOA control. I'd checked with the county before building, no permit needed, since it didn't cross public land. So why were they targeting me? My mind was spinning. Grace needed me more than ever. Last week she could barely stand after chemo. Without the bridge, I'd have to drive 45 minutes around the lake, and with her condition, every minute counts. I texted Grace, "HOA wants to tear down the bridge, I'll handle it." She replied weakly, "Why would they do that?" Don't worry too much, but I had to worry. It's my responsibility to her. I glanced at the calendar. The HOA board meeting was tomorrow at the community center. I'm not good at arguing, but for Grace I'd scream in Margaret Pierce's face and the whole board's too. I didn't know that decision would pull me into a mess way beyond the bridge, a conspiracy that'd later bring the FBI to Grace's door. That night, I lay in bed, eyes wide open, mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Without the bridge, how would I get food to Grace? How would I reach her in time if she fell or needed emergency help? I heard Lake Clearwater's waves lapping outside, like a reminder of what was at stake. I clutched the blanket, telling myself, I'll fight them. No way I'll let them win. But as I closed my eyes, I couldn't help thinking, was this just about the bridge, or was something bigger hiding behind that yellow letter? Tomorrow morning, I'd get answers, or at least start looking for them. The next morning, I stood outside the Lake Clearwater Community Center, clutching the yellow HOA letter, my heart pounding like it might jump out of my chest. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you've been following along, you know I'm fighting to keep the wooden bridge, the only way to my sister Grace's island, who's battling cancer. Last night, I barely slept, my head spinning with the thought of losing that bridge. Today I had to face the HOA board, especially Margaret Pierce, to save it. I took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside, not expecting this meeting would be the first step into a bigger mess. Inside, the air was stifling with the murmur of about 20 neighbors on folding chairs. Up front, 5 board members sat behind a long table, looking like they were presiding over a trial. Margaret Pierce was in the middle, her gray bob perfectly styled, reading glasses dangling on a chain around her neck. She didn't look up as I walked in, just flipped a page in the agenda like I didn't exist. I found a seat near the aisle, gripping the letter until the paper crumpled. Then Margaret spoke, her voice ice cold. Next item, enforcement action on an unapproved structure. I knew right away they were targeting me. I raised my hand, trying to keep my voice steady. I want to talk about the violation notice for my bridge. Margaret looked up, eyes narrowing through her glasses. Laura Bennett, 18 Shoreline Drive, right? We've noted your unauthorized structure. It violates 3 separate bylaws. I stood, feeling every eye on me. But the bridge is on my private land, I argued, and it connects to Grace's island, which isn't even under HOA control. I checked with the county, no permit needed. Margaret pursed her lips, a fake smile not reaching her eyes. The lakefront falls under our jurisdiction, she replied. You didn't submit plans for proper approval. I felt blood rush to my face. My sister has stage 3 breast cancer, I said, my voice catching. That bridge is how I get her to treatment, bring her meals. It's Grace's lifeline. Margaret cut me off, emotionless. Personal circumstances don't exempt anyone from the rules. The board's decision is unanimous. From the corner, Tom Hayes, the new neighbor who moved in 6 months ago, nodded smugly. I clenched my teeth. Tom had complained about my wind chimes, my bird feeder, and now the bridge. But his giant boat trailer parked in his yard, no one mentioned that. I'll appeal, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Margaret smirked. Go ahead and try, but construction on that thing stops immediately, and demolition starts next week. I wanted to scream, but her cold stare silenced me. As the meeting ended, I walked out, head spinning. Then Jenna Carter, a young mom from down the street, touched my arm. This happened to me too, she whispered. They made me tear down the kids' playset last month, said it was too visible from the lake. Margaret's husband golfs with the county commissioner, they control everything around here. I looked at Jenna, suspicion rising. How do they get away with it? I asked. She shrugged, eyes worried. I don't know, but something's off. On the way home I glanced at Tom's house. He was on his deck, holding a telephoto lens, snapping pictures of my bridge. When he saw me looking, he smirked and waved like he was taunting me. I clenched my fists, telling myself, this isn't just about the bridge, something bigger's going on. That night, I texted Grace. The meeting was awful, but I won't give up, she replied. Be careful, Laura. I didn't know her warning would soon come true, and this fight was just beginning. The night after the HOA meeting, I lay in bed, eyes glued to the ceiling, my mind still reeling from Margaret Pierce's words. Demolition starts next week. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you've been following along, you know I'm fighting to keep the wooden bridge, the only way to my sister Grace's island on Lake Clearwater, Michigan. Grace is getting weaker from cancer, and I can't let her be cut off. But after today, after Tom Hayes' smug look and Margaret's cold attitude, I felt something was wrong, like a storm was coming. I couldn't yet see. I just dozed off when a sharp noise sliced through the dark, like a chainsaw roaring outside. I bolted up, heart pounding, and ran to the window. Under the faint moonlight, I saw figures moving near the bridge, just yards from my house at 18 Shoreline Drive. No way, I whispered, throwing on a jacket and rushing out, barefoot on the wet grass. As I got closer, I saw it clearly, 3 figures in dark hoodies, using an electric saw to cut through the bridge's planks. Splinters splashed into the water, each sound like my heart breaking. Stop, I yelled, my voice lost in the night wind. They paused for a second, then one turned, face hidden, but I swear those eyes stared at me like a warning. I ran back, grabbed my phone, and called the police, hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. It's someone's destroying my bridge, I told the non-emergency line, trying to stay calm. 18 Shoreline Drive, Lake Clearwater, they're tearing it apart right now. The operator said they'd send someone, but I knew it'd take at least 20 minutes too long. I went back to the window, watching them keep at it, each cut slicing into me. The bridge was half gone now, teetering over the water, then they stopped, jumped into an unmarked truck, and vanished into the dark, before police lights flashed in the distance. Officer Daniels arrived, yawning as he took notes. Probably just animals, Miss Bennett, he said, eyeing the wreckage skeptically. Animals with power saws, I snapped, pointing at the clean cuts. He shrugged. Got proof who did it? I shook my head, anger choking me. No, but I know it's not random. Daniels handed me a card, said to call if I had something solid, then left. I stood there, staring at the ruined bridge, helplessness washing over me. Grace wouldn't make it if I couldn't fix this, but how when the HOA wanted it gone? The next morning I checked the damage in the pale sunlight. The bridge was unusable, support beams sliced through, railings broken and floating on the lake. I texted Grace, they wrecked the bridge last night. I'll figure it out, she replied. Be careful, Laura, I'm scared. I was about to call a repair guy when my phone pinged, a text from an unknown number. Selling's easier than fighting, some battles aren't worth it. I froze, looking around. No one was near, but I felt watched. Then I saw Tom Hayes on his deck a few houses down, aiming a telephoto lens at me. He didn't hide it, smirked and waved like at the meeting. I clenched my fists, blood boiling. He knows something, I told myself. I went inside, grabbed my camera, and snapped the scene, the cuts, the wood, everything, for evidence. Then I called Jenna Carter, who'd warned me after the meeting. Jenna, they trashed my bridge last night, I said, voice shaking. What's going on? She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, I'm not surprised. Margaret and Tom are up to something shady. Her husband golfs with the county commissioner, they're not messing around. I swallowed hard. You mean Horizon Estates? Jenna sighed. Maybe, be careful, Laura. I hung up, staring at the broken bridge through the window. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a warning, but I wouldn't back down. Grace needed me, and I'd find out who was behind this, even if it meant facing Margaret, Tom, or whoever else. I didn't know the next step would bring me closer to the truth, and to danger. After the bridge was wrecked, I stood amid the shattered wood in the early sunlight, feeling like someone had punched me in the chest. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you've been following along, you know I'm fighting to keep the wooden bridge, the only way to my sister Grace's island on Lake Clearwater, Michigan. Grace is battling cancer, and that bridge was how I stayed by her side. But now, staring at the broken planks floating on the water, I knew I wasn't just up against the HOA, something bigger, darker, was at play. The anonymous text "Selling's easier than fighting" haunted me, and Tom Hayes' smug grin as he snapped photos from his deck kept replaying in my head. I knelt down, picking up a piece of wood. The cut was sharp, precise, not random. I took more pictures, hands trembling with anger and worry. Grace texted back, "Are you okay?" "I'm scared," I replied. "I'm fine, don't worry, I'll handle it." But I wasn't fine. Without the bridge, I'd have to kayak or drive 45 minutes around the lake to reach Grace, too long if she needed me fast. I went inside, deciding to call Jenna Carter. She was the only one at yesterday's HOA meeting who dared speak up, and I needed to know what she thought. Jenna arrived at my house in 20 minutes, cradling her toddler, eyes full of concern. We sat at the kitchen table, the yellow HOA letter still there like a silent threat. "Jenna, they smashed my bridge last night," I said, sliding the photos across. She looked at them, face paling. "I'm not surprised," she whispered, setting her kid in a high chair. "It's just like what happened to me. Last month, they made me tear down the kids' playset in my yard, said it was too visible from the lake. I argued it was on private land, but Margaret Pierce didn't care. She said, 'Rules are rules,' and fined me $500. I frowned. 'Well, why do this? My bridge doesn't affect anyone.'" Jenna leaned in, voice low like she feared being overheard. "Because they can. Margaret's husband golfs with the county commissioner, Laura. Half the board works for Horizon Estates, the development company buying up lakefront land everywhere. I heard they want to turn this area into a luxury resort. I went cold. Horizon Estates. You mean this is about money? Jenna nodded. Big money. Grace's Island is smack in the middle of the lake, perfect for their plans. I stood pacing the kitchen, but why not just offer to buy it outright? Why wreck the bridge? Jenna shrugged. Maybe to force you and Grace to sell cheap. Without the bridge, she's cut off, more vulnerable. I pictured Grace, alone on the island, too weak to lift a spoon after chemo. If Jenna was right, they were playing a dirty game. Got any proof? I asked. Jenna shook her head. Not yet, but I saw Tom Hayes meet someone from Horizon last week, at a coffee shop out of town. They swapped envelopes. Didn't look like a normal deal. Tom Hayes, that name again. I glanced out the window, seeing his house a few doors down. At the meeting yesterday, he backed Margaret, and this morning, he was photographing my wrecked bridge with a telephoto lens. Jenna's eyes widened. He's watching you, I nodded, a chill running down my spine. He knows something, or he's doing something. Jenna grabbed my hand across the table. Laura, be careful, if Horizon's involved, they won't stop. I nodded, but I'd already decided. I had to dig deeper. After Jenna left, I grabbed my laptop and started researching Horizon Estates. They'd bought up tons of lakefront land in Michigan, turning quiet neighborhoods into condos and resorts. Their latest project in the next county stalled because one landowner wouldn't sell. I looked out at the broken bridge. Grace's Island, I muttered. They want it. Then my phone pinged. Another unknown number. Don't dig too deep. Think of your sister. I froze, looking around. No one was near, but Tom was still there, on his deck, lens aimed right at my house. He waved, that smirk saying, I'm watching you. I locked the door, pulled the curtains, heart pounding. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a threat. But I wasn't scared, I was pissed. Grace needed me, and I wouldn't let them win. I texted Jenna, you're right, something bigger's going on. I need help. I didn't know that call would drag us both into a fight way beyond the bridge, a fight that eventually bring the FBI to Grace's door. After the second threatening text I sat in the kitchen, curtains drawn, staring at the phone like it might leap up and bite me. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you've been following along, you know I'm fighting to keep the wooden bridge, the only way to my sister Grace's Island on Lake Clearwater, Michigan. Grace is battling cancer, and that bridge was her lifeline, until someone trashed it last night. Jenna Carter just warned me about Horizon Estates, the development company Margaret Pierce and Tom Hayes seem tied to. The text don't dig too deep, and Tom's smirk from his deck chilled me, but I wasn't stopping. I needed the truth. That afternoon, I was clearing the broken wood outside when my phone rang, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Oh, hello, Miss Bennett. This is Henry Brooks from Horizon Estates, a smooth male voice said. I hear you're having trouble with your property. My stomach nodded. How'd you get my number? I asked, glancing out the window to see if Tom was still watching. Small community, he chuckled. Listen, I've got a solution for both of us. Horizon's looking for lakefront land around Clearwater. If you sell 18 Shoreline Drive, we'll pay top dollar, $800,000, and we're interested in your sister's island too. 1.3 million for that. Solves your HOA problem too. I stood frozen, gripping the phone. You mean buy my house and Grace's Island? Henry went on, voice syrupy. Exactly, enough for you both to move somewhere nicer, live better. Think of your sister's health. I cut him off. I'm not selling my property, or Grace's. He paused, then said, think it over, I'll call back. The call ended, but my heart raced. They knew about Grace's cancer. How? I called her right away. Grace, has anyone from Horizon Estates contacted you? Her voice was faint over the speaker. Yeah, this morning? Someone named Henry offered to buy the island, said it'd cover treatment somewhere better. I gritted my teeth, pacing the living room. They called me too, offered sky-high prices, $800,000 for my place, $1.3 million for the island. Grace sighed. How do they know about my illness? Don't sell, Laura. This island's all I've got from Mom and Dad. I nodded, though she couldn't see. I swear I won't, but something's off. I hung up, opened my laptop, and dug back into Horizon Estates. Results popped up. They'd bought dozens of lakefront lots in Michigan, turning them into luxury resorts. Their latest project in a neighboring county stalled because one owner wouldn't sell, just like Grace's Island. I peeked through the curtains, seeing Tom still there, telephoto lens glinting in the sun. He's in on this, I muttered. Then I recalled Jenna's words. Tom met someone from Horizon, swapping envelopes. I texted her. Horizon just called, offered to buy me and Grace out. You saw Tom meet them, got pictures. She replied fast, not yet, but I'll watch. Be careful, Laura. I nodded at the screen, but my head was spinning. If Horizon wanted Grace's Island, wrecking the bridge wasn't random, they wanted her isolated, us desperate to sell cheap. 800,000 and 1.3 million was big money, enough for Grace's bills, but it cost our family's 3-generation legacy. No way. I stepped onto the porch, staring at the ruined bridge. Henry Brooks could sweet-talk all he wanted, but I didn't trust him. This offer was the next step after the threats. A trap. I texted Grace, don't listen to them. I'll find a way, she replied. You're the only one I trust. I gripped the phone, resolve rising. But as dusk fell, a black SUV crept past my house, tinted windows hiding the inside. It paused a few seconds, then sped off. I shivered, ran inside, and locked the door. My phone pinged, another unknown number. Good prices don't last forever. Here is the translation into American English, preserving all content without adding or removing anything. I pulled the curtains tighter, my heart pounding. They didn't just want the land, they wanted us scared. But I wouldn't give up. Grace needed me, and I wouldn't let Horizon, Tom or Margaret win. I didn't know that Henry's call was just the beginning, and a darker truth was waiting ahead. After the call from Henry Brooks and the black SUV gliding past my house, I sat in the living room, curtains drawn, clutching the phone like it was my only weapon. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you've been following from the start, you know I'm fighting to keep the wooden bridge, the only way to my sister Grace's Island on Lake Clearwater, Michigan. Grace is getting weaker from cancer, and after Horizon Estates offered to buy our land, $800,000 for my house, at 18 Shoreline Drive, $1.3 million for Grace's Island, I knew this wasn't just about the bridge being wrecked. The text "good prices don't last forever" echoed in my head, and Tom Hayes' stare from his deck felt like it was drilling into me. I had to figure out what was going on before they did something worse. I opened my laptop, hands trembling as I typed Horizon Estates again. Last night, I'd only skimmed, but now I dug deeper. They'd bought dozens of lakefront lots in Michigan, from Traverse City to Muskegon, turning them into condos and luxury resorts. An old article from a local paper read, Horizon's Torch Lake project stalled because the last landowner refused to sell. I peeked through the curtains at the ruined bridge. Grace's Island, I whispered, they need it to finish their plan. But why not offer up front? Why wreck the bridge, send threatening texts? I messaged Jenna Carter, Horizon wants me in Grace's land. Found anything on Tom yet? She replied, no pics yet, but I'll watch. Don't go alone. I couldn't sit still. I grabbed the property map from the cabinet, old papers my parents left when they gave the island to Grace. I spread it on the kitchen table, tracing the boundaries of my land and Grace's Island. The bridge sat fully on my private property, connecting to an island not under HOA control. I'd checked with the county before building, no permit needed. So why did Margaret Pierce insist it was a violation? I opened the HOA bylaws, reading line by line. After an hour, I found it: the board controls structures visible from community property. I frowned. Visible from where? I grabbed my camera, determined to prove it. Outside, a cold wind blew across Lake Clearwater. I walked the shoreline, snapping the bridge from every angle: the community dock, the main road, the water. Trees blocked it completely from the dock and road. From the lake it was a faint blur unless you looked hard. They've got no claim, I muttered, a fleeting sense of victory. But as I headed back, a black SUV, the same one from last night, crawled by, tinted windows hiding the inside. It stopped, then sped off. My heart raced. They were watching me. Back inside, I locked the door, uploaded the photos to my laptop, then I heard a soft knock at the back door. I jumped, gripping the phone, creeping over to peek through the curtain slit. No one, but a white envelope sat on the step. I opened the door, snatched it, heart pounding. Inside was a Horizon Estates card, handwritten final offer, $800,000 for you, $1.3 million for Grace. Expires tomorrow. I spun around, locked the door fast, feeling like the walls were closing in. Someone had been in my yard, in daylight. I called Grace. They just left a card at my back door, offering to buy our land. How are you? Her voice was frail. They called again this morning. Upped it to $1.5 million. Laura, I'm scared. I swallowed hard. Don't be. I won't let them take the island. Grace whispered, but without the bridge, I don't know what to do. I took a deep breath. I'll kayak stuff to you, we'll get through. She protested, winter's too dangerous. I was firm. I'll find a way. Don't sell Grace. She agreed, but her shaky voice broke my heart. I hung up, staring at the card. They knew about Grace's illness, knew I wouldn't quit, and they weren't stopping. I went back to the laptop, searched Henry Brooks. He was Horizon's development director, investigated for pressuring land sales in Ohio but got off. Then I looked up Tom Hayes. A small article popped up, real estate lawyer Thomas Hayes disbarred for document fraud, 2018. I froze. Tom's a lawyer. He moved here 6 months ago, right when Horizon targeted Clearwater. I texted Jenna. Tom's a disbarred lawyer. He's deep in with Horizon, she replied. Oh my God, got proof. I typed, not yet, but I'll get it. That night, I heard noises outside. I pulled the curtains, saw a flashlight sweep the broken bridge. I called the police, but when Officer Daniels arrived, no one was there. Probably animals, he said. Yawning. I snapped. Animals don't use flashlights. He shrugged, left. I locked up, sank onto the couch, hugging a pillow. Then my phone pinged, unknown number. Don't make this harder. I looked out. Tom was on his deck, telephoto lens glinting. He waved, smirking like a challenge. I clenched my fists, resolve surging. They wanted me scared, but I wouldn't quit. Grace needed me, and I'd prove the bridge wasn't a violation and expose Horizon, Tom, Margaret, no matter the cost. I didn't know the next step would thrust me into a more dangerous showdown and closer to the dark truth. After the night the flashlight swept the wrecked bridge, I sat on the couch, hugging a pillow, eyes locked on the window where Tom Hayes had just waved from his deck, with that smirking grin. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you've been following from the start, you know I'm fighting to keep the wooden bridge, the only way to my sister Grace's island on Lake Clearwater, Michigan. Grace is battling cancer, and after Horizon Estates offered to buy our land, then sent the threat, don't make this harder. I knew I couldn't fight alone. Yesterday's digging showed Tom's a disbarred lawyer, and the bridge doesn't break HOA rules, but I needed proof, and allies. The next morning, I texted Jenna Carter, I need to meet someone who knows the HOA's insides. Tom and Horizon are watching me. Jenna replied, meet Ethan Brooks. He was HOA treasurer, quit last year over disagreements. I'll set it up. 2 hours later, I sat in Cedar Point Cafe, 10 miles from Clearwater, facing Ethan, a thin man with salt and pepper hair, eyes full of worry. Jenna sat beside, holding her toddler. Jenna says, you're in trouble with the bridge. Ethan started, sliding a manila folder across. I'm not surprised. Margaret Pierce and the board don't just want your bridge gone, they want your sister's island. I opened the folder, seeing HOA minutes, invoices, payment lists. What's this? I asked. Ethan lowered his voice. Proof I collected before quitting. The HOA paid tens of thousands to a non-existent consulting firm, Green Valley Consulting. I checked, no address, no license. The money went straight to someone's pocket. I flipped a page, saw a $50,000 entry labeled Lakefront Services. Who's behind it? Ethan shrugged. I suspect Margaret and her husband, but when I asked, they told me to shut up. The next day, my house got ransacked, nothing taken, just a warning. I went cold, recalling the Horizon envelope left at my back door. They've threatened me too. Horizon wants our land, $800,000 for my house, $1.5 million for Grace's Island. Ethan nodded. Their style. Horizon's not just building resorts, their parent company's tied to casinos. They want Clearwater as a gambling hub, and Grace's Island is the last piece. My eyes widened. Casinos, how do they pull that off? Ethan pointed to a document, Senator Daniel Hayes. He pushed laws with loopholes for recreation zones on county land. Horizon donated big to his campaign. I swallowed, mind reeling. So Margaret and Tom are Horizon's pawns. Ethan nodded. Tom was a real estate lawyer, document fraud was his game. I bet he helps them pressure owners into cheap sales. I gripped the folder. I'll use this. Thanks, Ethan. He gave a weak smile. Be careful, they don't like snoopers. On the way back I called Jenna. Ethan's right, it's a huge scheme. Casinos, a senator, the works. Jenna sighed. You're not alone. I know others the HOA's screwed over. That night I went to Jenna's house down the street. Inside, besides her and Ethan, were Michael Torres, a tall bearded man, and Clara Evans, a white-haired lady with a cane. Jenna introduced Michael had to dismantle his dock last year. Clara gets weekly fines for her veggie garden. Michael spoke, voice deep. They said my dock violated community aesthetics, though it's on my land. Cost me $10,000 to rebuild elsewhere. Clara cleared her throat. I get fined $50 a week for growing tomatoes, say it's unapproved species. But Margaret's rose garden, untouched. I looked around. They're targeting us, because Horizon wants lakefront land. Ethan nodded. Exactly. They isolate people, force them to sell or give up. I spread Ethan's folder on the table. This is proof of fake payments. Horizon wants Grace's Island for a casino. My bridge was trashed to pressure us. Michael clenched his fist. I want to fight back. Clara nodded. Me too. Time to end this. Jenna took my hand. We're in this together, Laura. I smiled, feeling hope for the first time in days. Good. We start by proving the bridge isn't a violation, then we expose them. But when I got home, my lights suddenly went out. I checked. The neighborhood was lit, just my house dark. I called the power company. They said no outage. My heart raced. Then I heard noises outside, soft footsteps on grass. I pulled the curtains, saw a shadow near the bridge, flashlight sweeping. I called the police, but when Officer Daniels arrived, no one was there. Probably the wind, he said, yawning. I snapped. Wind doesn't walk. He shrugged, left. I locked up, sat down, clutching my phone. It pinged unknown number. You don't listen, do you? Think of Grace. I froze, looked out. Tom was there, on his deck, telephoto lens glinting. He waved, smirking like a blade cutting. I texted the group, they cut my power. Tom's watching. We need to move fast, Jenna replied. Meet tomorrow, don't let them win. I gripped the phone, resolve blazing. Grace needed me, and now I had a team. Ethan, Jenna, Michael, Clara. We wouldn't just save the bridge, we'd take down Horizon, Margaret, Tom, and whoever else was behind it. I didn't know the next step would pit us against a bigger, more dangerous foe than I'd imagined. After the night of the blackout, and the shadow lurking outside, I sat in the kitchen, gripping my phone, eyes fixed on the threatening text. You don't listen, do you? Think of Grace. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you've been following from the start, you know I'm fighting to keep the wooden bridge, the only way to my sister Grace's Island on Lake Clearwater, Michigan. Grace is battling cancer, and after our group, me, Jenna, Ethan, Michael, Clara, uncovered that Horizon Estates wants her island for a casino, I knew I couldn't stop. Tom Hayes watches me from his deck, and the threats are closing in. But today someone new joined the fight, and she might change everything. That morning, I was brewing coffee when the doorbell rang. I jumped, peeked through the curtains, not the black SUV, but a young woman, brown hair tied high, holding a notebook. I opened the door, hand on the knob. You're Laura Bennett, she asked, voice firm. Hi, Sarah Klein, reporter with the Clearwater Gazette. I heard about your bridge and the HOA trouble. I frowned. How'd you know? Sarah smiled faintly. Rumors spread fast in a small town. I want to write about it. Something's off with the Lake Clearwater HOA, and I think you know. I let her in. Gave the short version. The bridge wrecked. Margaret Pierce rejecting my appeal. Horizon Estates offering to buy, and the threatening texts. Sarah scribbled fast, eyes lighting up. Horizon Estates, huh? I've investigated them. They buy lakefront land across Michigan, often by force. Got proof. I slid Ethan's folder across. Fake payments, ties to Senator Daniel Hayes. This is what we've got. And Tom Hayes, my neighbor, is a disbarred real estate lawyer. Sarah flipped pages, nodded. Tom Hayes, I know that name. He's working for someone bigger, maybe Horizon. I leaned in. Jenna saw him meet a Horizon guy last week, swapping envelopes. Can you get photos? Sarah shook her head. Not yet, but I'll track it. If Tom's the link, I'll find it. She stood. Laura, this is bigger than you think. If Horizon wants a casino, they won't stop. I nodded. I know, but Grace needs me, and I've got a group. Jenna, Ethan, Michael, Clara. Sarah smiled. Now me too. I'll dig, but you've got to be careful. That afternoon, I met the group at Jenna's. I told them about Sarah. Ethan nodded. Your reporter could go public, but if she digs, Horizon'll push back. Michael clenched his fist. Good. I want them out in the open. Clara cleared her throat. I've got this. She pulled out an old notebook, crammed with handwriting, 12 years of HOA meeting notes. Margaret fined me for my garden, but let her friends off. I flipped through, saw a slew of petty violations. Michael's dock, Jenna's playset, all fined, but Tom and Margaret's pals untouched. This is gold, I said. Proves they're targeting us. That night, Sarah texted, meet me at Cedar Point, 8 p.m. I drove over, heart pounding. Sarah sat in a corner, slid photos across. Tom met a Horizon guy this afternoon, at a lot outside town. I got these. The shots were blurry but clear enough. Tom handing an envelope to a suit, Horizon logo on the car. What'd they say? I asked. Sarah hushed her voice. Couldn't hear it all, but they mentioned the last island and building permits. That's Grace's island. I went cold. They want it for the casino. Sarah nodded. And Tom's the middleman, probably faking papers to force sales. I gripped the photos. I'll use this, thanks Sarah. She warned. They'll know I'm tracking. Watch yourself. On the way home, headlights flared in my rearview black SUV, tailing me through 3 turns. I sped up, heart racing, got home as it slowed, then passed. I locked up, texted the group. Sarah's got pics of Tom with Horizon. They're after Grace's island. SUV followed me home. Jenna replied, meet tomorrow. We've got to act. I sat down, staring at Sarah's photos. Tom and Horizon didn't just want land, they wanted us terrified into selling. But with Sarah our group was stronger. I texted Grace, I've got a new ally. Don't worry, I didn't know Sarah's involvement would take this to a whole new level, and a danger I hadn't imagined. After the black SUV tailed me home, I sat in the living room, clutching Sarah Klein's photos, proof Tom Hayes met with Horizon Estates. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you've been following from the start, you know I'm fighting to keep the wooden bridge, the only way to my sister Grace's island, on Lake Clearwater, Michigan. Grace is battling cancer, and our group, Jenna, Ethan, Michael, Clara, now Sarah, found out Horizon wants her island for a casino. Tom's watching me, threats piling up, but tonight it all blew up, right at Grace's house. The next morning, I called Grace to check in. The phone rang and rang, no answer. I texted, you okay? Call me now. Nothing. My heart pounded. Grace never missed my calls, especially after chemo. I messaged the group, Grace isn't answering. I'm going to the island, Jenna replied. Wait, it's too risky. But I couldn't wait. With no bridge, I hauled the kayak from the garage, stuffed a waterproof bag with Ethan's documents, Sarah's photos, and a water bottle for Grace. I dragged it to Lake Clearwater's edge, wind biting my skin, waves growling like a storm warning. Paddling across, my hands burned, waves soaking my shirt. Every stroke was a prayer for Grace. At the island's dock, I saw 2 black SUVs parked near her house, Horizon's logo faint on the doors. Lights glowed inside, shadows moving behind curtains. I tied the kayak under the dock, crept through wet bushes, heart racing. Voices drifted through an open window. The Swiss treatment center's the best in the world, a smooth male voice said. All costs covered, Miss Bennett. Just sign. I recognized Tom Hayes. You can't afford special care, Grace. We're helping you. I peered through the kitchen window. Grace leaned on the counter, pale, clutching her favorite green sweater. Tom blocked one exit, while a gray-suited guy, Charles Reed, I guessed from Horizon's card, held papers in front of her. My sister'll be here soon, Grace said, chin up despite her frailty. Charles smirked. Your sister's tied up with her own trouble, a misunderstanding we arranged. I gritted my teeth. They thought I was stuck. I tried the back door, locked. I grabbed a heavy flower pot from Grace's garden, smashed the window. The crash froze them. I climbed through, cutting my hand but ignoring it, stepping into the kitchen. Actually, I'm here, I said, voice steely. And I know why you trashed my bridge, to isolate Grace, force her to sell. Tom spun, face twisted with anger. Mind your own business, Laura. Grace moved toward me, eyes bright despite fear. Stay away from my sister, I growled, stepping in front of her. Charles adjusted his tie. Calm, Miss Bennett. I'm Charles Reed, Horizon Estates. We're offering your sister a generous package, $1.5 million, plus treatment costs. I snapped. You bully a cancer patient after wrecking her only way in. That's generous. Charles shrugged. Business is business. This island's the centerpiece of a new resort and casino. Every other owner signed, I scoffed, because Tom faked papers to force them. Tom advanced, glaring. You've got no proof. I pulled Sarah's photos from my bag, held them up. How about this? You met Horizon yesterday, swapped envelopes, talked about Grace's island. Charles paled, then regained composure. That photo proves nothing. I bluffed. I've got recordings already sent to someone who'll release them if anything happens to us. Grace gripped my hand, voice stronger. This island's my family. I'm not selling. Tom lunged, threatening. You know who you're messing with. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, raised it. Why don't you tell me? Margaret, Horizon, Senator Hayes. Charles laughed coldly. Horizon doesn't take no, and neither does Hayes. I stalled. So the senator's in on this casino scheme. Tom barked. Charles, shut up, but Charles waved him off. Once we have this island, the project goes ahead, no matter what you know. Tom grabbed Grace's arm, yanked hard. Sign it. I rushed forward, knife up, not to stab, but to scare. Let go. Suddenly blue lights flashed through the window, a loudspeaker blaring. FBI here. House surrounded. Come out, hands up. Charles went white. Tom dropped Grace like she burned him. You brought them. Tom roared. I smirked. No, your greed did. Grace hugged me, trembling but relieved. The FBI pounded the door, and I knew the fight wasn't over, but we'd just won big. I didn't know this moment was just the start of Horizon's downfall and would drag down Margaret, Tom, and everyone behind them. When blue FBI lights flashed through Grace's window, I stood in the kitchen, still gripping the knife, heart pounding after facing off with Tom Hayes and Charles Reed. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you've been following from the start, you know I'm fighting to keep the wooden bridge, the only way to my sister Grace's island, on Lake Clearwater, Michigan. Grace is battling cancer, and minutes ago I smashed a window to climb in and protect her from Horizon Estates. Tom let go of Grace as the loudspeaker boomed. FBI here. House surrounded. Come out, hands up. Charles went pale, and I just smirked. Your greed brought them here. But I had no idea the FBI had been watching for months, and everything was about to crumble. Here is the translation into American English, preserving all content without adding or removing anything. The door burst open. 2 agents stepped in, guns raised. Drop the knife, one shouted. I set the knife on the counter, hands up. Grace hugged me, trembling. Agent Carter, the taller one, introduced, flashing a badge. This is Agent Nguyen. Miss Bennett, we're not here for you. They turned to Charles, cuffing him as he stammered. This is a misunderstanding. Tom bolted for the back door, but a yell outside showed he was caught. I looked at Carter. Why are you here? Carter motioned me to sit, Grace still gripping my hand tight. We've been investigating the Lake Clearwater HOA and Horizon Estates for 8 months, Carter said, placing a folder on the table. Money laundering, wire fraud, extortion. Your complaint about the bridge helped us. My eyes widened. You mean I accidentally helped you? Nguyen nodded, almost smiling. You documented things we couldn't access without a warrant, vandalism, threats, Carter added, but this morning Margaret Pierce was tipped off about the investigation. We had to move fast. I went cold. Grace didn't answer her phone today. I thought they'd done something to her. Grace whispered, they came right after chemo. I couldn't call. Carter looked at her. We had a team head to the island when Miss Bennett reported Tom and Charles here. You're safe now. I exhaled, but asked who tipped Margaret off. Nguyen shrugged, not sure yet, but her husband golfs with the county commissioner, could be a leak. Carter opened the folder, pointed to photos, Margaret meeting someone from Horizon, exchanging envelopes. This is what you didn't see. Over $3 million funneled through an HOA shell company. I slid Sarah's photo across. Tom met Horizon yesterday. Sarah Klein, a reporter, caught it. Carter nodded. Good. Tom's a disbarred real estate lawyer, specializes in faking papers to force land sales. He worked for Charles. I held Grace's hand. They trashed the bridge to isolate Grace, pressure us to sell. Nguyen nodded. Classic move, but her island's the final piece for Horizon's casino. I asked, the casino's real? Carter pointed to documents. Senator Daniel Hayes carved out legal loopholes. Horizon donated big to him. Grace trembled. They knew my medical bills, like they were tracking me. Carter frowned. We'll look into it. They might have hacked hospital data. I stood. I've got evidence. Bridge photos, threatening texts, Ethan Brooks's documents. Carter picked them up. Ethan Brooks, former HOA treasurer. I nodded. He gave me fake payment records. Nguyen jotted notes. You and your group did well. We'll need it all. Outside, Tom was cuffed, yelling as they shoved him into a car. I didn't do anything wrong. Charles stayed silent, head down. Carter looked at me. Margaret and the board are getting raided tonight, but Tom slipped out earlier. He might have warned them. I chilled. Will they retaliate? Nguyen said, maybe. Stick with your group. Report anything odd to us. I nodded, hugging Grace tighter. I won't let them touch you again. Grace smiled faintly. You always protect me. The agents left, leaving us in the quiet house. I cleaned up the broken glass, handed Grace a cup of water. They'll pay, I said. Grace nodded. I trust you. I texted the group. FBI nabbed Tom and Charles at Grace's. They've been on Horizon and the HOA for 8 months. Margaret knew this morning. Jenna replied, oh my God, you okay? Ethan text, good, stay safe. Michael, we won. Clara, not yet. Margaret's still out there. I sat by Grace, gazing out the window. The FBI car lights faded, but I knew it wasn't over. Tom was caught, Charles too, but Margaret was free, and Horizon wouldn't give up easily. My phone pinged, unknown number. Think this is the end. Think again. I froze, texted the group. They're still threatening. We've got to be ready. Sarah replied, I'll write a big piece. They won't get away. I held Grace, feeling both relief and worry. The FBI stepping in was a turning point, but Margaret and Horizon were still a threat. I didn't know that hours later the TV would show Margaret in cuffs, and our fight was just starting to escalate. After the FBI left Grace's island, I sat beside my sister, hands still shaking from the new threatening text. Think this is the end, think again. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you've been following from the start, you know I'm fighting to keep the wooden bridge, the only way to Grace's island on Lake Clearwater, Michigan. Grace is battling cancer, and last night, the FBI nabbed Tom Hayes and Charles Reed at her house, revealing an 8-month investigation into Horizon Estates and the HOA. Margaret Pierce got a heads up but wasn't caught yet. Today, I walked into the final community meeting with a wire taped to my ribs, to expose her in front of everyone. Early that morning, Agent Carter called. Laura, we need Margaret to incriminate herself publicly. Tonight's HOA meeting is the chance. You up for it? I agreed though, my heart raced. Carter came to my house at 18 Shoreline Drive, taping a wire under my shirt. Just get her to admit the Horizon link, he said. We'll be close. I texted the group. Jenna, Ethan, Michael, Clara, Sarah. Tonight I'm wired, bringing evidence to the residence. Jenna replied, you're so brave, we'll be there. The Lake Clearwater Community Center was packed, buzzing with angry murmurs. Over 50 residents sat on folding chairs, eyes locked on the podium where Margaret Pierce stood, her gray bob still perfect, reading glasses dangling around her neck. She tapped the podium, voice calm. Recent accusations are baseless. The board always acts for the community's good. I sat in the front row, Jenna's hand gripping mine, the wire rubbing my skin. I waited out her rehearsed speech, then stood, voice ringing in the silent room. Then why'd you wreck my bridge to isolate Grace, while Horizon pressured her to sell her island? Murmurs spread. Margaret pursed her lips. Your unpermitted structure broke bylaws, Laura. This isn't about your sister. Jenna stood, passing out copies of Ethan's documents to residents, fake payments, altered minutes. I held up Sarah's photo. So why'd Tom Hayes meet Horizon, talking about Grace's island? Here's proof. Residents muttered, flipping pages. Michael yelled from the back. It's out now, Margaret. Margaret paled, but stayed composed. That photo proves nothing. I stepped to the podium, holding Clara's notebook. 12 years of Mrs. Evans's records show you find us. Michael's dock, Clara's garden, Jenna's playset, but spared your friends, whose pocket got Horizon's money. Margaret snapped. Where'd you get that? That's confidential. I smirked. No, it's public record in a federal investigation. Residents buzzed, one shouting explain it. Margaret slammed the podium. You're ungrateful. The resort would boost property values, we'd all benefit. I closed in. By forcing Grace, a cancer patient, to sell her island. By tweaking laws with Senator Hayes. The room went dead silent. Margaret realized her slip, eyes darting. Grace was offered fair compensation if she weren't so stubborn. I cut in. So you admit the bridge demolition tied to Horizon? She stumbled, then blurted. Hayes promised us cover. He said no one notice if we kept it quiet. Residents roared in anger. The back door swung open. Agents Carter and Newson marched in, Senator Daniel Hayes sandwiched between them. I promised nothing, Margaret, Hayes said, adjusting his tie. My office is cooperating with the FBI. Margaret blanched. Daniel, tell them you approved. Hayes coolly, you were under a lot of pressure, I'm afraid. Agents moved in, cuffing Margaret as she screamed. You can't do this. Tom was already caught, now her. I turned to the residents. They wanted our land for a casino, but were stronger. As Margaret was led out, Jenna hugged me. Michael slapped my shoulder. Clara raised her cane, laughing. Ethan texted, you did it. Sarah snapped photos from the corner, whispering big story coming. I exhaled, wires still recording. But leaving the center my phone pinged unknown number. You'll pay. I chilled, texted the group. They're not done. We've got to be stronger. I got home, hugged Grace via kayak. I took down Margaret tonight, I said. Grace smiled weakly. You're my hero. I didn't know this win was just the start, and Horizon, though shaken, wasn't fully down. After the final community meeting, I drove home from the Lake Clearwater Center, hands still trembling after Margaret Pierce was cuffed by the FBI in front of everyone. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you've been following from the start, you know I've been fighting to keep the wooden bridge, the only way to my sister Grace's island on Lake Clearwater, Michigan. Grace is battling cancer, and last night, I wore a wire to expose Margaret, forcing her to admit ties to Horizon Estates and Senator Daniel Hayes. But the final text, you'll pay, chilled me. Today Margaret's trial happened, and the fallout started to show. Early morning, the TV blared footage of Margaret led from her upscale neighborhood home, hands cuffed, arrogance gone. Sarah Klein posted a big piece in the Clearwater Gazette, Lake Clearwater HOA collapses in fraud scandal. I texted the group, Jenna, Ethan, Michael, Clara, Sarah, Margaret's arrest is on TV. We did it. Jenna replied, you're amazing. Ethan, not over yet. Horizon's still lurking. I called Grace across the island. Seen the TV. Margaret's done. Her voice was weak but happy. You saved me, Laura. The trial hit 3 months later, at the county courthouse. I sat front row with Grace, now in a wheelchair from heavier chemo, Jenna and Michael beside me. Margaret stood before the judge, designer outfit swapped for an orange jumpsuit, head bowed. Her lawyer, no direct evidence. But the prosecutor presented my meeting recording, Ethan's fake payment docs, Sarah's photos of Tom with Horizon, Clara's 12-year log of unfair violations. I testified, voice firm. She wrecked my bridge to force Grace to sell her island for Horizon's casino. Margaret didn't look at me, but her hands shook hearing it. The judge banged the gavel, room silent. The court sentences Margaret Pierce to 8 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud and fund misuse. Residents clapped. Grace squeezed my hand. Margaret was led away. The first time I saw her week outside, Senator Hayes resigned under pressure. FBI found offshore accounts tied to Horizon cash. Charles Reed got 5 years, but Tom Hayes vanished, no trace, maybe hiding in a non-extradition country. I asked Agent Carter, how'd he slip away? Carter shrugged, he's quick. But Horizon's crumbling. The fallout spread. Horizon Estates pulled their Clearwater project after losing Grace's Island, the final piece. The community got over $2 million in compensation from seized HOA assets. Michael suggested, build a new bridge. I laughed. For Grace and all of us. But not everyone was happy. Margaret's husband sued me and the group for emotional distress, demanding $500,000. Jenna warned, they want to drain you. I shrugged, though worried. My savings were nearly gone after months of fighting. One night, I stood by the lake, gazing at Grace's Island in the dark. Without a bridge, I had to kayak to check on her, but what if she fell? My phone pinged unknown number, you won this round, but it's not over. I chilled, texted the group. They're threatening again. Tom maybe, Sarah replied, I'll dig. Stay safe. I went home, locked up, but couldn't sleep. Horizon might have pulled out, but someone still wanted payback. A week later, I kayaked to Grace's Island, found her on the porch, pale but smiling. Doc says I'm responding to the new meds, she said. I hugged her, hiding my fear. Great, I'll build you a new bridge. Grace held my hand, you've done enough. I shook my head, not yet. We've got to protect the island. On the way back, I saw a flashlight sweep the shore like the night the bridge was trashed. I called the cops, but when they arrived, no one was there. Daniels shrugged, probably kids. I snapped, kids don't text threats. I texted the group, someone's at the shore, we're not safe yet. Michael replied, meet tomorrow, build the bridge, and keep fighting. I sat down staring at a family photo on the table, Grace, Mom, Dad, the island. We beat Margaret, but Tom and Horizon's remnants were still out there. I didn't know the final battle was coming soon, and would bring real peace. After the night the flashlight swept the lake shore, I sat in my house at 18 Shoreline Drive, gripping my phone, eyes on the darkness where Grace's Island loomed. I'm Laura Bennett, and if you've been following from the start, you know I fought to keep the wooden bridge, the only way to my sister Grace on Lake Clearwater, Michigan. Grace beat cancer, Margaret Pierce got 8 years, Horizon Estates fell apart, but Tom Hayes vanished, and threatening texts still haunted me. Today our community gathered, not just to celebrate Grace's recovery, but to rebuild what they tried to steal from us. One crisp spring morning, I kayaked to Grace's Island with the group, Jenna, Ethan, Michael, Clara, Sarah. Michael led, now the new HOA president, holding plans a wider bridge, built with the $2 million from Margaret's seized assets. Clara, leaning on her cane, laughed, no more garden fines. We stood on the shore as more residents arrived, over 50, bringing flowers, food, joy. Grace, still frail, stood by me, her green sweater bright in the sun. Ribbon cutting, Jenna asked, holding champagne. Grace shook her head, smiling. No ceremony needed, this bridge is everyone's. I looked at the new bridge, sturdy wood, carved railings, linking my land to Grace's Island, in 3 minutes, instead of a 45-minute loop. Michael cut the ribbon, kids ran across, laughing, no longer fearing fines. Jenna swapped plants with Clara from her once banned garden. Sarah snapped photos, her final piece, Lake Clearwater Community, from corruption to rebirth. Spreading across Michigan, Ethan whispered. You did it, Laura. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on Grace, stronger every day. Grace's Island went into a trust, our family's 3-generation legacy safe forever. Horizon was gone, Tom didn't resurface, though I still scanned the shore each night for shadows. Michael held a new HOA meeting, rewriting bylaws, no petty rules, just community focus. A new family moved into Tom's old house, their laughter echoing, a sound I'd never heard from there. I walked the bridge with Grace, steps light. "What'd you learn from all this?" she asked, wind in her hair. I paused, gazing at the shimmering lake. Sometimes the thing they try hardest to take is what saves you. This bridge didn't just connect us, it connected everyone. Grace hugged me. "Any regrets?" I thought of Margaret, Tom, the fearful nights, then looked at the bridge, the residents picnicking below, free, fearless. "Not a second," I said, knowing it was true. I texted the group. "We won, for real," Jenna replied. "Because of you, Laura." I stood on the bridge, lake breeze hitting me. Tom might be hiding, but we were stronger. Grace held my hand, and I knew, some victories aren't measured in court, but in the freedom to cross water to who you love. This story ends here, but if you stuck around, thank you for fighting with me. The story reflects many real aspects of life in the U.S. today, especially issues of land ownership, local corruption, and community strength. In it, Laura Bennett fights to protect the bridge to her sister Grace's island, on Lake Clearwater, Michigan, facing an HOA led by Margaret Pierce and Horizon Estates' scheme to seize land for a casino. Laura's battle isn't just about family property, it's against injustice from powerful figures, like Senator Daniel Hayes and Tom Hayes, a disbarred real estate lawyer. This mirrors real U.S. cases where HOAs overreach, or developers pressure residents to sell through legal tricks and economic stress. The FBI's intervention, and the alliance, Jenna, Ethan, Michael, Clara, Sarah, show how the legal system and community unity can be powerful weapons against corruption. The lessons here are specific and practical for real life in the U.S. First, like Laura researching HOA bylaws and finding fake payment proof, arm yourself with knowledge of your legal rights, say reading property contracts or local laws to avoid manipulation. Second, Laura building a team with folks like Ethan offering inside docs, and Sarah a reporter exposing truth highlights the value of finding allies. Neighbors, lawyers, or local press, to face stronger foes. Finally, despite threatening texts and Tom's stalking, Laura didn't quit for Grace, teaching us that protecting family and community takes courage and persistence. In today's U.S., where power sometimes tilts toward money and influence, remember, truth and unity, like the new bridge linking the Clearwater community, can overcome any challenge. Act like Laura, learn, connect, and never give up on what matters most to you. If you loved how we took down Margaret and rebuilt the bridge, hit subscribe, and catch me in the next video. More secrets are waiting to be uncovered.